It's the Arts and Culture, ooh, echoing. The Arts and Culture Commission, is that okay? Can you hear me okay? Yeah. The first item on the agenda is to approve the order of agenda. If someone could make a
Would move to
motion.
approve that?
Second.
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right. Minutes are in our packet from the last meeting. Again, a motion would be good.
I'll move to approve the minutes of February 20th.
Second?
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, so the capital improvement plan, and I believe both Nicole and maybe Megan are going to do some information sharing on that one.
Good afternoon, Commission. It'll just be me on this one. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right.
Speakers.
So we thought we would just give you all a little bit of information, kind of some high-level information on the city's capital improvement plan and corridor studies and kind of how they work, how they operate, and what that means, and a little bit of information behind that. So the capital improvement plan is basically the city's annual plan for infrastructure projects. These projects can range from major construction or reconstruction to sidewalk projects, water line projects, excuse me, street tree planting, sidewalks, kind of a variety of things. Corridor studies are approved plans that investigate conditions along a specific roadway, and they make recommendations of how to construct or reconstruct, in some situations, a roadway. Those corridor study plans take into consideration a lot of things along the corridor, especially depending on where they are, if they are adjacent to another jurisdiction, things like that. But some of the things they take into consideration are right-of-way width, traffic count, bike ped circulation, traffic speed, intersections, and in some cases, economic components, such as Main Avenue. So a little bit of how they work. For the CIP, the Capital Improvement Project Plan, city departments kind of get together and prioritize the necessary projects for the year and put them on a plan. The CIP plan is approved by the City Commission, and it's, like I said, is the annual plan for projects of that year. Those plans can and sometimes do change if there's kind of emergency situations that come up of a project that may have to take precedent over something else. They can also change due to weather. A project might have to span 2 years if we have certain weather conditions that could happen. Corridor studies guide the design of a corridor and are generally completed prior to being on a CIP plan. So if you think about a little bit of a timeline, it may be just a short amount of time, 1 year prior to a project being on the CIP plan where a corridor study is completed, or it could be 10 years. It just depends. There are different pots of money that go into infrastructure projects and corridor studies, so there's a number of different pots with different timelines. So it's kind of a strategy to kind of get things in place to keep moving. For corridor studies, there's generally coordination with MetroCog. There's also coordination, like I mentioned, with other jurisdictions like West Fargo and Moorhead. Corridor studies have a community engagement component, such as last night, if anyone saw, there was a community input meeting for the 17th Avenue South corridor study. So as I mentioned, there are funds for both infrastructure projects and corridor studies, including state and federal, so timelines and priorities kind of have to balance and potentially change. A little bit of information on kind of just like the span of a project begins as a corridor study. Generally, especially with our arterials, some of those smaller local roads wouldn't have a corridor study. Corridor study happens, a project then, when it's ready that it needs to be redone or constructed, goes on a CIP plan. Once the CIP plan is approved, it goes pretty quickly into design, then moves pretty quickly into bidding, and then into construction. So as we all know, especially with this winter, construction timelines can be very short, working months. So things generally tend to happen very quickly. Planning staff is becoming more involved with these processes, especially at the corridor study level and design level. I've been recently I'm part of the 17th Avenue corridor study and part of the Main Avenue design process. And Erin Nelson in our office has also been involved with studies in the south side of town. So what we bring is design and our policies that we have to these discussions. So things like walkable centers from Go 2030 or bike ped infrastructure from our bike ped plan, things like that. So right now the city has an annual CIP plan. There is hope that the city can move more towards a 5-year annual plan. And we're hopeful that that can help really get some traction in being able to incorporate artists and public art into cities' infrastructure plans. So that was what I'm going to present on. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
A couple of us met with MetroCog, and it was part of doing some research for the capital art project that we're going to be embarking on, and got a list of projects, but it includes all of the metro area. One of the things that we talked about was incorporating art into some current projects, being Main Avenue. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, I'll talk about that a little bit and maybe ask if there's anything Nicole wants to add. With Main Avenue, and the initial corridor studies were before my time at the city, and there was a recent corridor study that happened with Main Avenue. I think that's right. And so with design, I believe was halted a little bit to look at some of the economic components around what the roadway may be, considering different factors. Main Avenue is on a very, very tight timeline. The project design was very short, especially for a decently significant project with such a big corridor. So Main Avenue was moving pretty fast, the design for that, to be able to incorporate art or public art or artists in tandem with that project, but there are opportunities within the right-of-way to be able to incorporate art. But in this instance, it's moving so fast that there just wasn't enough time to kind of slow that down, especially when considering funding that goes along with it, federal funding and things like that. I don't know, Nicole, if you had anything else.
Maybe if you could address, Nicole, yes, certainly the project is moving along, but how and when would there be some involvement talk about or discussion about art?
Yeah, so I think I'm going to try to present from here, if that's okay, since there's nobody else in the room. But I guess maybe on TV it makes a difference. Maybe to clarify, to add to Megan's description, so Main Avenue, for those who've been watching this for a while, has actually been in probably about a 7 or 8 year process. And so the corridor kind of engagement, as we talk about, open houses and involvement from the surrounding business owners, et cetera, started probably about 8 years ago. And from that involvement, a recommendation came forward. That recommendation, I think the reaches of that was from the river all the way to 25th Street, and included some interesting topics related to, as you go west of University, there's that kind of narrow land across from Mom's Diner, they're between the railroad and the interstate, or Main Avenue. And there's some, sorry, I'm kind of thinking out loud as I answer your question on how we got where we're at. And so it's a little detailed answer, more detailed than possible. So anyway, there's been tons of debate at the state level, federal level, and local level. This is really an interesting project in which, for the first time I've seen in Fargo, I've been here 12 years, where we've seen kind of rural and urban policies almost collide. So most of the DOT and out of Bismarck and the federal level and the policies that apply here really fit a more, what I would consider a more rural, that business highway in a rural community going through, and those policies might not be applicable to the middle of the city of Fargo's downtown. And so the corridor project came through, went in front of the city commission. They did not act on it 8 years ago. They decided to put it aside until the funding came through to actually build the project. So fast forward, 6 years or so, when the funding came through, brushed off that corridor, and most of the people that were involved in that project 8 years ago aren't the same people that we start to do outreach with. So it's almost like it started over. So here we are today, where again, about 2 years ago, it started the kind of, I would call, redesign process. And meanwhile, all these federal funds have been sitting there waiting to be spent. And where we're at today is, and I should back up, we have invited Jeremy Gordon to be here, as well as engineering. They can't be here at this meeting, but we can schedule some future meetings where we can get into more detail on the CIP and engineering. So we're kind of pitch hitting for engineering today. And anyway, where we're at with Main Avenue, the construction documents are about completed, and what we see as amenities like, we kind of classify amenities being, plants and beautification elements, including art, would be in that. We would seek the funding for that and find locations for those. And that's pretty typical to a city process, where the engineering and the infrastructure gets built under one package, construction package, and the amenities follow behind with a different package. So what we're trying to do right now is engage with engineering to find out, access to lights and water, other things that might seem appropriate for public art, where we might want to do some sort of, kind of a bigger piece or a bigger thing that might require some other utilities, and make sure those get into the city's paving plans as best as we can. And so Megan has been part of that discussion with our engineering office. And then there's time for us to come forward to the Arts and Culture Commission and the public about public art opportunities at key locations. For instance, the intersection of Main and Main and Second is going to be probably key gateway opportunity to the city of Fargo. It's got some significant meaning there. At University of Maine, there's some significant right-of-way areas where we can encourage Broadway in Maine. So there's going to be pockets of right-of-way opportunities for public art, in our opinion. And so we've begun those discussions with Arlette, as well as engineering, and representing that point of view at our staff design meetings.
Yeah, so just letting the commission know that even though Main Avenue is proceeding to be built or reconstructed, that there has been a lot of discussion about placement of art and having the infrastructure in place to make that happen. The funding for that piece is the big question probably that still needs to be answered. Mark or Deb, do you want to talk a little bit? I know there's a question that was brought up in a few different meetings about, with new construction, the possibility of doing utility box wraps and how that could get worked into the plans, perhaps? It's another CIP kind of question.
Yeah, well, one thing I've done is review the 2019 capital improvement plan to see what opportunities might exist there, and probably not for 2019, but just looking at the example of what is in 2019 and what could be done with those projects, if those projects happen in future years when there's enough time for planning and budgets and things like that. The utility box wraps is a big one. Any intersection in the city that has a traffic signal is going to have that same utility box that we've seen wrapped in downtown. And so that's a really easy one that could be implemented, around town. There's sort of a playbook being created by the bid to make it easier to, and then perhaps even if this is looked at more in depth, you could have a roster of artists or banked art that's already purchased and the rights are already created for it. So that way, every year or every time you want to wrap one utility box, it's not like a call for artists that takes a month and all that kind of thing. Other examples are lift stations, which are typically a little building that's about, I don't know, 25 feet square that usually is on a corner of a intersection somewhere that could have decorative brick or mural opportunities, lighting opportunities. Of course, there's always flood walls. There's a number of flood wall projects going on that could also have decorative components to them. One that's, I think, happening this year is a quiet zone installation on 7th Avenue, I believe. And so there's crossings, there's fences, there's barriers, so things like that, can be looked at in a different way. Sidewalks, over in Moorhead, they did a project in a number of places around the country where they've imprinted poems and things like that into the concrete. Streetscapes are always happening with all the projects. And then one thing that's come up recently is the underpasses, the lighting of the underpasses, and then also, bridges. There's pedestrian bridges that are, I think in yesterday's meeting, there was a pedestrian bridge, a lift bridge discussed over here at the river. So, things like that, when you have, and there's lots of different examples around the country that if you look hard enough and spend some time, you can find these examples so that you can bring those forward and say, here's what's happened in other cities, and then use those as examples of how we can try to keep incorporating these things into everyday projects the city's doing year after year.
At the executive committee meeting, is it Brenda?
Yes.
Yeah, Brenda met with us from the engineering department, and it seems like there's quite a bit of support for moving forward with some of these things within the engineering department. So that is wonderful. It's just great to see that. And planning has gotten, I think, it sounds like, more involved in the actual design and planning for projects. So this is our biggest impact, the public structures. So it's wonderful to see it moving forward. All right, any questions or other comments?
Just wanted to note that MetroCog is also on board,
Yeah, yep.
very much so.
Seems like everybody's kind of coming together. That's great. Planning department update. I believe, Nicole, you were going to do that.
So I think this chart's a little hard to read, but the chair, Ms. Preston, asked me to present a little bit based on some of your past discussions on our our department organization. There's been a lot of change over the last year, 2 years, and this is a little outdated. This is right out of our 2018 budget request, and but I can go ahead and kind of explain some of the layout per se. So the planning department is broken up into 4 departments, or 4 divisions, if you will. Community development, urban development, which is headed by Megan, long-range planning, which is headed by Aaron Nelson, and our current planning coordinator, Donald Kress, and I failed to introduce Tia Broseth. And so we basically have I consider 4 managers in the planning department. Under me is also our assistant director, Mark Williams. This is a big shift from what we've been for the previous 20 years, when we had 2 divisions in community development and planning, and pretty much our focus was current planning, meaning the day-to-day building permits and site plans and plats, et cetera, the things that come in front of Planning Commission, and community development. Our community development has typically been focused on HUD, Housing and Urban Development, Community Development Block Grant, community building, things like that. And most of you remember Dan Molly was the division head there, and I was the division head in planning. And so with our our planning director at the time, Jim Gilmore, moved into strategic planning for the city of Fargo as a whole in our administration office. And then Dan Malia, of course, has moved across the river. And so as we restructured, just historically, it's been really hard to find to lead staff with many years of experience with planning backgrounds, planning degrees, land use, architecture degrees that with 10, 15, 20 years experience don't typically just land in Fargo. And so usually through that recruiting and succession planning is what we have been focused on for several years. And so with that in mind, we've kind of restructured to try to build in a succession plan as well as a structure to support some more long-range planning activities that would include Go 2030, Downtown in Focus, neighborhood plans, any of those bigger strategic planning efforts that require coordination, and urban development, which would include design standards, design review, Parks Department, our Parks District, up until recently, didn't have a landscape architect on staff. We provide a lot of those collaboration services and long-range park planning services in collaboration with the Park District. They now have some structure there to kind of continue that legacy. And so Megan is that interface between the Park District and Public Works, engineering, as we get into open space planning and with her landscape architecture background. And so with that being said, community development, we're starting to broaden that as well, based on some initiatives on housing and urban development. And instead of being 100% focused on federal activities, so that's money that just comes directly to the city of Fargo, then we use to staff people and support affordable housing projects and community development projects. And we're looking to build that network so we can use more local monies as match as part of those. With that, we have really just on staff, we have 3 planners working under TIA and community development. With with the size of federal funding that we get from this federal government, we should actually have, we just learned from HUD the other day that we should actually have 6 full-time people working on HUD full-time, and right now we don't even have 1 working on HUD full-time. And so you'll hear a common theme here. And then the other positions we have are an assistant planner supporting Aaron, Megan, and Donald, and then Kylie, who just moved into from assistant planner to planner to support also Aaron, Megan, and Donald in running her own projects as well. Catlin, and if you've met Catlin, Kara, and Brittany, who obviously supported the Arts and Culture Commission, have come to the planning department in kind of unique ways. What we've done in the past, due to lack of local money to support full-time employees, we've used consulting dollars. We have a pool of money for consulting, and we've used that to contract employees. And that is not a good hiring practice, both for our accounting purposes as well as for our financial management purposes, as well as our just responsibilities in what I call it, human resource practices. And so we've gotten away from that. And so I think there's been some discussion, I think from your last meeting, from what I heard, sorry I wasn't able to be there, but what's happening with Brittany? What's the future of that assistant planning support for the Arts and Culture Commission? And basically, Brittany came to us as an intern. We knew she was going to be part-time based on her family status, and we knew she would be moving from here within a year or 2. And so that's kind of where we're at today. We've been talking with the executive committee with Arlette and Deb on what does the future support for arts and culture look like? What are the needs and resources and skill sets do we need? We have an open assistant planner position, as well as 2 open community development assistant planner positions, just based on this last moving. We've lost a couple people to other communities. And so as we look at those positions, we'll be looking to support some of those skill sets for arts and culture as well. But Megan remains your primary contact and Kylie as well, and we're here to provide support and assistance, so.
Questions or comments?
Madam Chair. Yes. Is it on? Can you hear me? Oh, sorry. I have a question. So where you don't have names, are those positions you're currently recruiting to fill?
I believe so. This needs to be a little updated from, let's see. Yes, those are positions to be filled. And then the two bottom boxes, actually, yes, those are two. The very bottom box is actually a contracted position that will be going away.
Thank you.
So Nicole, the arts and culture, I'm assuming when you're talking about, well, are we still going to stay under the urban development coordinator?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because, I really see it as that design, kind of the softer component of infrastructure in the city of Fargo. We're trying to, as I go into my next topics related to the Fargo Project and Kresge Foundation grant, we're really trying to operationalize how, just on the heels of the discussion on the CEIP, how do we operationalize public art into our day-to-day operations at the city of Fargo and it become, I'm looking at Tracy and can't help but when public art used to be under the parking commission. And so really, we're really trying to get it its own place and integrate it in our day-to-day operations. And so we need to get it a home under a division. And so urban development would be the one.
So define for us a little bit better what urban development.
I would say urban development is design, design services, design standards. I would call it urban design instead of urban development as a definition.
Okay. Any other questions about that particular one?
Yeah, and maybe just one of the things I was going to add too, as we'll start talking about the budget as we move into, we're just on the heels of starting to talk, June is typically the month where we start, kind of pitching to the mayor and our liaison commissioner, Strand, on, budget requests and sharing that vision of where we want to go, who we want to be and what resources we need, et cetera. And so I look forward to continuing discussions with Arlette and Deb and the board members here on what those requests might look like for 2020. One thing to keep in mind, I think it was about a year and a half ago or so where Mayor Mahoney sat down with the commission and said, share with us your vision. What do you want to be? And so I think I wouldn't be shy in those, I guess just as a tip on, kind of resources, et cetera. With that in mind, knowing we don't always get what we ask for, and one of the things I think the planning department's been very blessed in recent history. This last year, we, as a whole, I think in the last budget season, the city commissioners received a request for 20 new staff members citywide. I think two or three were funded, and the planning department got one of those. And so, or I should say the inspections and planning department sharing one of those. But the fact that we got one, I think the commissioners are hearing, the quality of life, the things that affect the quality of life, the work that this group does, as well as others. And so for the first time, I shouldn't say for the first time, but for in my position, I feel a lot of support from our city commissioners and on the needs for this kind of work. So,
Okay. Fargo Project.
yeah, I'm going to kind of work backwards a little bit. So on the Fargo Project, I want to just dive right into project management, and then I'm going to come back and show you and describe the project as a whole. If it's okay, I'll probably take about 5 to 7 minutes kind of talking through this. And so the Fargo Project started out with a $100,000 grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. And when we hit that in 2010, we thought we hit the jackpot. And working with a prestigious artist out of New York, Jackie Brickner, nationally renowned ecological artist. And I was going to talk a little bit on how that work began. But at the end of the day, we started out with $100,000. 10 years later, we've ended up basically with a $1 million construction project. And what we didn't know when we started out with 100,000 is where we would end 10 years from now, and from then. And when we started in 2010, we literally thought it was a one-year project. And so, that's taught us, though, is some different project management techniques. And one of them that we use in the city, in the planning department, is what we call adaptive management. And so adaptive management is this idea of incremental learning along the way and evolution of the project, the goals, as we learn along the way. And which is very different than a typical CIP project management, where you're doing design drawings, building, and being done. And so as an example, for where we end up with on the Fargo project. So we've officially concluded all of our grants that we've received over the years. And on the right-hand column, we'll show you kind of how $1 million gets broken down into administrating the transformation of the Rabanus Park. And I will say the Fargo project will never be done, and because it's now an ecological restoration project that will continue forever, hopefully. And so how we got here, I'm going to break down a little bit, is so we entered in this field of, sorry, don't know how to use. You guys see this okay? I'm trying to get to the PowerPoint view. Yeah.
Slideshow, yeah.
Where do you see it?
On top,
On top.
about the middle, right above Save As.
Nope,
next
one
there.
just
Right, nope, nope,
Nope,
nope, nope.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
From the beginning, yeah.
Yeah, from
From
the
the
beginning,
beginning,
there you go.
There you go. Thank you. Glad nobody else is here. So the Fargo project really started as a creative placemaking. We had no idea we were entering into the world of creative placemaking as a profession. It's really at the height of, or it's really starting to gain traction as, and just kind of following up on Tracy's presentation last month. It's really, in terms of as a title, creative placemaking, we're seeing all these private foundations come forward with trying to get their, whether it's in the federal government, as well as the Bush Foundation, the Kresge Foundation, McKnight Foundation, and it's really a way of integrating arts with, fill in the blank, arts with health, arts with education, arts with transportation. And one of the reasons the Fargo Project continues to get notoriety is its arts with ecology, and as well as community development. And so just as Arlette had asked me to do kind of a quick overview of the Fargo Project in total. It's been a while since I've presented this to you in the past. Some of you have heard this before, so I apologize. But it really started through the inspiration of Mayor Wallaker, Pat Zavarall, and Jackie Brickner, who had come to visit based on an invitation. And it was really the question of, can these large vacant spaces that we use for stormwater management be transformed in a different way? And so we studied sites all over the city and came down to this as a location of where we could do a pilot demonstration project titled World Garden Commons. The Fargo project itself is considered kind of a concept of how we approach life in City Hall, and World Garden Commons is the pilot of that implementation of the Fargo project. And so this is surrounded, this shows you the urban watershed, and one of the things that makes this unique is the mix of land uses as well as the number of apartments that are surrounding this neighborhood. And we thought we would be able to engage this neighborhood within like a couple months. It's taken about 10 years. And so as we try to engage and find those networks for people to the location of the park across the street from them, has really been, I would call, the magic sauce. And so the secret on creative placemaking, especially at the national level, is what I call the magic sauce of how do you connect to that human feeling of through art, through design, through place, right? And so The work with Jackie started with the Native American Commission as we reached out to them to help us identify a site that was sacred and meaningful for them. And through the work of, this is Linda Different Cloud visiting us. She's an ethnobotanist from South Dakota and Montana, and then Willard Yellowbird and the Native American Commission doing a site-by-site visit. And this is the site that spoke to them the most and that we selected as our pilot site. We did a stipend for 5 local artists to work with Jackie so we could start to train the trainer as we implement a new way of doing work. And so really this started becoming an earmark. I had no idea the practice of social engaged practice was a public art prototype, and but through Michael Strand's effort lead and Dwight Mickelson, and that's Elle Ness, Chelsea Dahlstrom, and Loretta Volteri. And we started out after 2 years of outreach, getting 200 people to join us at a site for a We Design, we called it We Design public design charrette process that was led by the artists. And first we did a celebration at the site and dedication, and then worked into a model and exercise to learn how to work with stormwater in a way to shape community space that was meaningful to the people. You know, so the city engineers, we could design this all day long, but it's going to look like what it looks like before we transform this. And so it's really about how do we get it to be a place of meaning and culture. Dwight Mickelson designed the input, like the sand boxes, because we were working with probably 20 different languages. And so we needed a common measure to communicate with. We ended up with a common vision that includes this concept drawing, and we then hired, unfortunately Jackie Bruckner passed away in 2015, and to continue this work we then hired AE2S and Land Elements to help transform the community's plan into a construction document and vision that we can start to build. That's when the Our Place America and Kresge Foundation grants started to come forward. We have over, probably 50 different partners as part of this project, and this is just one example of our outreach that we continue to do today. We've actually contracted with Reach Partners to help us lead our community engagement activities, because what I continue to say at the planning department is that we are not event planners. We're horrible at it. And so we hire the experts to help us get that event planning. So one of the key parts, this was actually a presentation I did for the Bush Foundation, is coming in as a city planner, as a city landscape architect. You know, what did the artists teach me as part of this project is how to, what I thought was the problem, you know, this drainage basin ditch, wasn't really the problem. And the artists were able to help uncover the problem and develop a common language and gain the support and the engagement, not only through the public, but through every department at the city of Fargo. And so this is part of the transformation process, working with local artists, and that's Con Majak on the right, who we hired as a community liaison to help us with some of the church organizations. That ended up being our network. It was the church organizations to get to the access to the community public. So this is Dwight Mickelson's piece, the listening garden, and as it's more or less sits today. And this is one of our, through Welcoming Week, and one of the activities that we had 2 years ago, kind of christening that location. This what Megan started with us as an intern, and this is one of her drawings as she worked on translating between Jackie Bruckner, Land Elements, and the engineering department, and to basically turn this piece into this piece. So we work with the, I think this is working with NDSU and the Natural Resource Management Club, as well as community members. No, this was West Fargo Schools. We were working with West Fargo Schools as kind of part of a 2-day design exercise as we started coming up with a natural playground welcoming week event. And the main thing as part of this project, the 1-year plan, which I thought was going to be a 1-year plan, is really a 100-year plan. And so that's kind of what we talk about for adaptive management. I'm going to switch real quick to, if I can, to kind of how did we get here? And I apologize, I was going to put these all into one, but we're in flood management mode, so I'm a little distracted. How do I do this again?
First
Slideshow.
one.
Yep, from the beginning.
From the
Oh, there you
beginning.
go.
There you go.
So kind of how did we get here? I'm going to fast forward a little bit, but identifying that project definition to getting that organizational strategy. This slideshow ends in 2014. Obviously, we're in 2019, but we continue to evolve each phase of that work. And that project definition keeps evolving and changing as we go to transform the space. But most importantly, it's that transition between how does design, social, and ecology come together for this particular site. And what we found during the construction process and the design build process is we had to transform every step of this that we do at the city, whether it's bidding, whether it's building, whether it's site evaluation, any of those processes along the way really had to be evolved to include that adaptability of our findings along the way and to integrate. We ended up keeping Dwight Mickelson on the project so he could help be that advisory since he was part of that vision from the beginning. And really every step of the way had to evolve and transform. And this is kind of that structure that starts to look like to take, how do we make this happen? And it really requires, besides these departments, also health department, the police department, Parks District, just hundreds of people. And these you've seen before. So from the 2014 grant, we were able to get a $900,000 grant from the Kresge Foundation. And that leads me into kind of the next item on the agenda. So do you have any questions on the Fargo project, or I'd be glad to talk about it more in your binders. And maybe that was a question in the beginning, maybe a few months ago, half a year ago, we started producing those binders and bringing them to you. And I think some of you took them home, and we're willing to bring them back now that we're here at this location. If that's something that you want us to keep doing, we can do that. And in those binders, there's a lessons learned book that we've published on behalf of the NEA as part of this project that includes us kind of 10 best practices that we learned along the way that you have access to. Any questions or anything, or discussion points, or do you want me to roll into the next item?
Go ahead.
If I can figure out how to get there. So with that Kresge grant, they called us back and said, we like what you're doing. Can you do more of it? And we're like, well, we're not really ready. We're still working on the Fargo project. And so they said, well, what else are you working on? And well, we're working on the inclusion plan. So the Human Relations Commission, about 2 years ago, kicked off an inclusion planning process. And that we're still in the development of what that means and how to define that. We have a task force of about 15 community members. And before I took my position, so this work started before I took my position as director. And then when I came in as director and discovered we were working on this, we've started evolving, advancing this a little bit further. And really what we're trying to do is develop a kind of common language and common, these are my words, not necessarily the task force's words, because we're still evolving. But what we're trying to do is develop a community where people feel embraced, welcome, belonging, and part of the community and safe. And that, whether that's me or Megan or Kylie or Abdulwali, it could have a different definition and a different result. It means different things. And what we're trying to do is find out what that means so that we can develop policies and procedures and components that that can affect how we do things at the city. And so I saw a relationship with what we learned on the Fargo project to this and try to connect the two. And Kresge Foundation said, yeah, keep doing that, and gave us a grant for about 200,000. And so what we presented to them last fall was, because part of the work we do in community development and part of the work we do in the planning department is support NITHA and the Plains Art Museum and Buzz Lab, support the police department and what they are doing in Jefferson neighborhood. They bring in the community resource officers or trust officers, bring in the DJ and the party in the park and the works they do with the schools. The health department is working in the Jefferson neighborhood. Charism is working in the Jefferson neighborhood. There's a market they're working on getting healthy food access. And so again, if we remember what creative placemaking is, arts plus blank, fill in the word, it's arts plus all of these. And so how can we connect these pieces through public art and through artists' work? And so we've created basically a timeline where we're doing that development and investigation and project identification. We are just kicking off. We're bringing on Reach Partners as our project manager and starting to lay out a path forward as we learn. What we've learned is I can't define the problem. I can't define how we're going to get there. It's all of the folks that work in this community are going to define the problem and how we get there. I just need a facilitator, which happens to be Reach Partners, and continuing to evolve the community at large as well. The primary purpose, though, is the Kresge grant is how do we operationalize the Fargo Project? So how do we make the Fargo Project not its own special thing out there? Even when you talk to the Park District, it drives Megan and I crazy. Everybody thinks of the Fargo Project as its own thing out there, and not how do we change how we do things to do more of that. And so we're evaluating that and trying to bring that back inside to continue to work with the engineering department, the health department, police department, city administration, as we continue to network this piece. Because like if talking to Officer Bloom and Officer Ninemeyer and how they work the Community Trust Officer Program, it's quite amazing what they do with very little money. And how do we kind of continue to do that work? Same with Buzz Lab. That's not a sustainable program. How do we continue that work so that it is a sustainable program? And our work in the planning department and through our various avenues and access is how do we network those organizations and help, because for instance, the health department didn't know that Officer Bloom, they're both working in the same neighborhood a block away, didn't know each other was working on those activities. And so how do we bring those together is kind of the primary question. So that's the kind of just where we're at today with the Kresge Foundation project. And it's under the Kresge Foundation is multi-layered, different division, and it's under the creative placemaking division. So I'd be glad to answer any questions, and I know, Arlette, you might have had some questions you wanted me to answer more specifically.
Anybody else have any questions? I guess I had the opportunity to take a look at the grant application, and the Arts and Culture Commission is cited a few times in there. Can you talk a little bit about what would you see the role of this commission being with this grant?
I think I don't know yet. And so I think as we try to figure out the organizational networks. So first of all, the Fargo Project, let me back up. That was donated time by me. It was basically volunteer time. And so I kind of did it on the side. Nobody kind of knew I was working on it. And so and they kind of knew they knew I was working on it. But and then I transferred that to Megan. And so Megan's just kind of trying to keep it going. And so how do we kind of operationalize that and try to get that support structure in the city? I think as we look for opportunities for connecting, like the work of the Human Relations Commission and the work of the Arts Commission, the work of the Native American Commission, and the work of the Community Development Committee. We staff 13 boards and commission, and as we try to get those into a common work plan, I see engagement from that, as well as you can see art services and bringing artists involved. I can, one dream would be, can we get an artist in residence? And so how do we change how we think, and how we approach problem solving, really, and can we get artists at the table? And so looking at the Arts Commission as one way to help get that, kind of having you experience some of these experiences that we were lucky enough to experience as part of some of our community outreach activities, I think would be marvelous. I don't want to assume that you haven't had those experiences, so I think just continuing this conversation and collaboration. We literally just had our first meeting with REACH last week, so we really haven't even initiated any of this work yet. So, and that's kind of the nature of grant writing. You kind of just throw in your ideas and see what lands. And we had 1 week to turn the grant request around. And so what I'm learning from the private foundations is if we are somebody that fits in their portfolio, they reach out to us. And so really our community, where we're located, who we are, we fit in their portfolio. And so even these money, I was gonna make the point that even what shows on this in front of you is really a draft, and our timeline and expectations are a draft. They're very flexible, and I guess I look forward to you guys helping us develop that problem-solving approach and engaging as we find opportunities.
I have a question.
Tracy?
Nicole, you'd mentioned some of the other agencies in the city that are involved in this project, police and Fargo Park District. Any involvement from Fargo Public Schools?
Yes.
You mentioned Jefferson Neighborhood. I didn't know if it was engaged in the school as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So we work closely on the Fargo Project with both Fargo schools and West Fargo schools as part of that, and we expect to do the same here. So our big audience is the children and trying to figure out how to connect, especially that middle age group.
One of the reason I asked Nicole to focus both on the Fargo Project and this particular grant is we spend quite a bit of our time, I think, talking about individual projects and individual pieces of art and placing them in certain places in the city. But understanding that creative placemaking, and that's part of why Tracy did her presentation last month, trying to get us to understand that public art is truly broader than just placing a piece of art. So the importance of involving the neighborhoods and incorporating that interaction, which then again helps to sustain that sense of community as we grow larger. That becomes a bit of a challenge. So, I think this whole process is so important in attaining and sustaining that sense of community. So that's part of the reason why we wanted to bring it here. Any other comments or questions? All right, this will be an ongoing discussion, I'm sure. Joel, you were going to talk a little bit about communication plan, and Denise, we've been working hard on getting some stuff done on this, so.
Yes, so I wanted to talk about social media and the benefit that it would be able to bring the commission. I recently took a look at the Twitter account that's connected to this commission, and the Twitter account's been up for about a year and a half, and there's been about 240 plus tweets from the account. It's averaged about 2 likes per tweet. There's been about 135 retweets and the account reaching out to other accounts. So it's been sort of it's been very positive because there's a lot of good information that has come from the account, but a bit of a low engagement, both out and to the commission in this account. One of the positive benefits of having social media is that it's a free tool, whether it's Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. The way it's used, it could be a very positive way of communicating to the public at no cost to the city or to the commission. And so, looking at the one account that we do have, there's an opportunity for us to open up different accounts and to reach the public in a way that we haven't yet, at least through social media. Some of the benefits that specifically that opening up these accounts could have for the commission is one is to increase awareness of what we do, to very quickly communicate, whether it's the call for artists that we recently had, the different programs that we sponsor. Another one is to engage the public to our own website that's housed in the Fargo.gov website. To find that website, if you go to the city website, it's a bit of a path to struggle through. Usually they say 2 or 3 clicks, you should be able to find where you're at, and I think we're at about 5 or 6 clicks, if you know where to start from. So, by setting up these different accounts, you can have a link right at the top, and you can click on it, and bam, you're right there. I think another benefit would be that we can start generation conversations about public art in the Fargo-Moorhead area that do not generate from the people in this room. If we're sharing information out there, individuals who would follow us might start talking among themselves, coming up with their own ideas, seeing things that we don't see, and coming to the table and to bring things to us for a broader discussion. And of course, the final point for the benefit is the first point was that it's cost effective. There are low-cost options within Facebook or Instagram to promote posts, even on Twitter to promote tweets. And that's something that we can definitely take a look at in the future as well. Recently, I spoke with a friend that works at the Star Tribune. He's one of the editors for their digital media wing. And he had some advice for us, things for us to consider moving forward. One thing he had suggested is, if we were to start new accounts, to keep the names short and concise, something that's really catchy. And I think the Twitter account that we have is a great example of that. I think it just says arts and culture. It's something that someone will be able to pick up on real quick and understand what the account is about or what we do. 2 things, if we're thinking of new names or new identities for the commission is, 1, don't come up with a name that's too high-minded, or the commission of whatever. But also to keep in mind the names that we're coming up with, because if we're not careful, we may open ourselves up to mockery. And social media is fantastic about poking and prodding individuals if they have a mix-up. Another thing he said too, just a strategy, is to increase followers. Currently, we are following 201 accounts, and they're very good accounts that we're following. But I was going through a number of art accounts, and a lot of them are at 2,000, 4,000, 8,000 accounts that they're following. And generally, if you follow somebody on social media, they'll do a follow back, and right away you have someone listening to what we're putting out there. And if they have a lot of followers and they start retweeting or reposting what we're putting out there, then their followers start hearing what we're saying as well, and our audience is starting to expand. Post 2 to 4 times a day. Twitter is great for information. Instagram is great for art images, and Facebook is great for community engagement. When we say post 2 to 4 times a day, that's not coming up with a conversation and putting it out there. That's retweeting something from the community. If organization A or business B, if they're putting something out there, for us to repost that or retweet that, that's us showing support for the arts here in the area. They'll notice that we're doing that, and they might be willing to repost or retweet something that we're doing as well. Employ hashtags. People follow hashtags, or they follow certain phrases online, and if we're hashtagging, I know that the Twitter account's really good at that as well. That pops up on other people's lists. That brings people to see what we're talking and what we're engaging on. The point, though, I think, is to communicate what we're doing, but also, too, is for us to be the face of the arts in the Fargo-Moorhead area. If we're engaging a lot with other accounts, they might start following us and listening to us, and that increases, that'll increase, I think, our message and what we're trying to communicate. The last point is to dedicate an individual, or identify somebody that would be able to take hold of this. Social media takes up a little bit of time, and you know, I think it's the city staff that maintains the account right now, and they're doing a fantastic job. I would hate to pile on more work to the staff who already has a full plate. It was suggested that we find someone that's in college right now, a young savvy person who knows the social media culture, understands it far better than someone who's, you know, in their 40s, you know. And so, yeah, and someone who might want to build a resume saying that they, you know, that they worked on this at one point. Whether we put some funding aside to support that person or to promote the low-cost promotions that Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram has, is something to consider as well. So those are thoughts. I open it up to the group here for thoughts or suggestions.
Boy, you're all quiet today. Is it the setting? Is it tough to get discussion going because of the setting?
I think it is.
I think it is too. Okay.
It's really awesome, Joe. That's great information, and I think that's really a direction we have to go, because I follow the Twitter account, but I'm not a fan of Twitter, and I would love to see arts and culture on Instagram. It's my favorite, you know. So I think if we hit them all, then we hit, you know, more people. I think people are loyal to their particular brand, I guess. So I agree. We really need to stretch out there. And I think, too, that that's going to bring more attention to us from artists, so that we'll get more applications when we do our grant rounds.
The Instagram community is a very artist-heavy group. I'm on Instagram. It's all art for me, and I thoroughly enjoy it. And I follow a lot of people, a lot of artists who I enjoy. They follow me. It's a great interaction. You know, we have a collections here in the city. It would be great to put those items out there, you know, so that they're not just hidden away behind the doors or the walls here, you know, and that the community can see what's here. Just thoughts, but yeah.
Yeah, we've had some discussions about a Facebook page too, and understanding there's some restrictions probably with city policy, but also thinking creatively, not having it necessarily just a city arts and culture Facebook page, but more of a public art in Fargo kind of Facebook page, so it'd be more generic. So, you know, to move these discussions forward, because we've been having this, I think, for quite a while. Denise, it's been part of the communication plan that you helped us put together. What would you suggest? Do we need to sit down and talk with Greg, or, yeah?
Yeah, I think this is a great, great, Joe. And I think what I would like to do is just bring this to the staff and take it under advisement, and maybe get some internal meetings, and maybe pull a few of you in as you would like, and just start to have some of those discussions on what it might look like. I think just speaking on behalf of IT, and that's probably another group that we would bring in, is obviously the city has some security kind of components and things like that, but policies continue to evolve, so I think we just have the discussion.
Yeah, sounds good. And as all of you probably know, flood emergency declaration has happened, so are you thinking this might occur after everything's kind of subsided?
Yeah, so just to maybe, thanks for that kind of introduction. Yeah, just as a FYI, our department basically goes down to 2 people during this emergency declaration, and so I'm one of the emergency operation managers, one of 3, and so yeah, we're kind of in full mode. So we're hoping that in a week, we'll know a lot more, and we'll have a better game plan on what our calendar looks like over the next 4 to 6 weeks. The hard part with us is the ramping up, and then the crust happens, and then it's the cleaning up. And so we're looking probably, this is just my guess, 4 to 6, even 8-week process in which it disrupts our activities at the office.
So Joel, I ask you to remind us if we haven't moved forward with this in another month and a half or so.
Understand? Yes.
Sound good?
Yes. Yeah.
All right. Just to also give you all an update on some of the other items in the communication plan, Deb and I have been making some presentations to different groups. I should have probably counted these up, but I would say probably 6 to 8 groups, probably. We've been to the Native American Commission inside the city, and I don't know, probably a total of 150 people probably have been exposed to what we're doing. So that's great. And we'll continue to reach out and do more if we can. So if any of you have groups, John, I'm even looking at the FMVA group. We haven't done that. That might be a group to talk to if you'd be interested.
And Nicole came to the annual meeting that we have.
Okay. And, okay, all right. Sounds good, whatever. All right. So the call for artists. We have passed the deadline. It was March 1st, and we got 4 responses. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get the selection. The way we have decided to do this in the past is set up a task force, pull people from the resource groups, the resource individuals, whatever you want to call them, talent group, to pull them in and help us select, I guess, winners is what you'd call them. And that meeting will happen tomorrow. So we will have those decisions for you at our next meeting. Unfortunately, not for today.
Is that meeting open to the public?
Yeah, I'm sure it is. We didn't invite the public or do a notice, and so, I technically haven't we haven't advertised it, yeah.
But people would be welcome to come.
Yeah, if people
by all
wanted to
means.
come, yeah.
Where is it? When is it?
It's tomorrow morning, 9 to 11, on the second floor of City Hall in the Meadowlark Room.
And Megan, could you just let us know who did you get to be on the group?
I do not have that in front of me. I apologize. What we did was selected a time, the earliest time we could, and we had gathered a roster from last year, if you recall, and pulled and sent an email to everyone asking availability, and took the first 5 people basically that had given us a response so we could kind of keep moving forward. I apologize, I don't have those names in front of me.
So maybe it would be helpful, and let me also say something about the distribution list. You all got that spreadsheet with multiple emails and names, I think, were attached to them. And that is the distribution list that we're sending out our notices to for the call for artists and everything else. Please take a look at that again. I've suggested some additions to that. We'd like to grow that as much as we can. So I just want to make sure everybody pays attention to that, looks at it, and provides some suggestions. Maybe it would be helpful to see that roster again of the experts or the talent bank or whatever we're calling that thing. And I can't remember how those names got on that list even. So let's review that again at our next meeting, and maybe that's another list we can grow. Okay. Public comments. Either of you have something you want to share with us? Okay, just observing. Welcome, by the way. The other thing, and this isn't necessarily on the agenda, but just an announcement, the American for Arts conference is coming up. And just to let everybody know,
Yeah, we'll send out an email. I forgot that was on my list. we'll send out an email in June, mid-June. The Americans for the Arts Conference is going to be in Minneapolis. And so, and they also have a pre-workshop on public art and municipal public art kind of relationship. But, and then there's another one on, I think, kind of inclusion and equity kind of discussions as well. But I'll send that out, and if, just to see if, it's so close, it seems like a nice education opportunity.
Sounds good. And then just an update on our work plan. We had been planning to bring kind of a final product today, but with the flood issue and everything else, it didn't get done yet. So we will bring it back, hopefully, to the next meeting. All right. Anything else?
You know, I think we should let the commission know that the executive committee has been meeting monthly with the planning department, but we have now wrapped those meetings up to weekly. So just so anything that comes up, I mean, make sure you let I know, because we're touching base regularly, really regularly now. We're like rock stars in the world of the city offices.
Okay. If there isn't anything else, the next meeting will be April 17th, unless we're in the middle of a flood. Yuck. Otherwise, a motion to adjourn would be good.
So moved.
Second?
Seconded.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you.